And she started off by asking, anybody know what resurrection means? And everybody kind of stared at her blankly, these little kids. And finally, one of them, little boy, raised his hand. He says, I don't really know what it means, but I know if it lasts more than 4 hours, you have to see a doctor. That's a true story.
Am I on? Okay. Define jury nullification and how do we use it?
Well, jury nullification, basically, if you've ever been on a jury, you know that the judge is going to, the attorneys are going to present their evidence, and then they will make their closing arguments, and then the judge will give instructions to the jury. And those instructions will be what the law is. You know, and sometimes the judge will say, if these are the facts, you find these facts, you must acquit, or you must find the person guilty, or you must find this person liable for that automobile accident. Basically, most juries are set up in most states where the juries decide the facts and the judges decide the law. But a lot of places, the judge just tells you what the law is and how you have to interpret that law. Jury nullification means that you do not have to follow that just because the judge says so. You have a right to vote your conscience the way you want to vote on a jury. And if it's contrary to what the judge says the law is, that's too bad. The jury is supposed to have the final say-so. That's how the jury system was set up. The jury system was supposed to have the final say-so. And they had situations in the past where prosecutors have been trying to put somebody in prison for bogus charges. And they make it look like that person broke the law, and they're saying this is what the law is, and juries have actually come and found the person not guilty, despite being told they had to find them. That's what jury nullification is.
Has the administration provided any documents regarding Fast and Furious?
Very few, and most of them that they provided were several years ago, and they were redacted to the point where you couldn't read them. And by the way, we have 4 lawsuits going right now, or preparing 4 lawsuits against the federal government for refusing to answer our Freedom of Information Act request on veterans situations. And we need to raise some money for the United States Justice Foundation. We're spending an awful lot of money. So there's a card back there where you can send a contribution, the U.S. Justice Foundation. We don't charge all the military members we're representing, we're not charging them a penny. We don't charge anybody to represent them. We raise our money independently. We need about $10,000 right now in the next couple of weeks so I can help this guy out in Canton, because this veteran's just getting hammered. They're taking away his Second Amendment rights, basically because he had his bills paid by an automated system through the bank. And they found on that basis, and that basis alone, he was incompetent to handle his own financial affairs. And once you're declared incompetent, then you can no longer own firearms in this country. And they're kicking down doors. They had a Navy veteran in New York that his door kicked in recently. And why was he found incompetent by the state of New York and the federal government? He was being treated for insomnia.
I think the businesses which don't want to serve some others based on their religious beliefs should refuse to obey judgments against them by courts which want to force them to do so. What do you think?
I agree. And because freedom of religion is extremely important in this country. It's in the First Amendment. It's something that can't be tampered with by the federal government. And when you tell somebody that they have to violate their religious beliefs just to be politically correct, I don't care what a judge says. If I was a business owner, I would shut down the business and just refuse to obey. You know, it's called civil disobedience. And we need more of that, I think.
I'm afraid so.
If and when federal martial law happens, will Texas be in the crosshairs first, inasmuch as Texas seems to be in the lead against federal takeovers?
Texas is already in the crosshairs. I mean, the EPA is running rampant here, trying to shut down our industries. The border is being left wide open so that criminals can come in. And we got ISIS cells in El Paso. We know that for a fact. We got ISIS cells in El Paso. So we're already at the crosshairs, and yes, it's just going to get worse under martial law. At that point, you know, Texas would, best thing Texas could do is just seal our border, period.
How can citizens nullify the Affordable Care Act? How would they avoid the penalties imposed by the federal government?
The Affordable Care Act is such a mess to begin with. You know, they're just about nullifying it on their own. Our best bet right now is still in the courts with the Affordable Care Act. Or the states are doing what they can by saying not setting up exchanges, and that will bring it to its knees. If the Supreme Court rules the way we think it's going to rule, that federal exchanges cannot insure people in the states that don't have their own exchanges, then the whole system's going to crash. So the states need to hold the line there. And there's 26 states, I think, that are involved in this lawsuit now. And so I think that's the key at this point is the courts when it comes to the Affordable Care Act.
I read all the questions, and I just want everyone to know that. So if something seems repetitive, it's because we read all the questions. If I set it down, you might wonder why. How can we legally opt out of Obamacare?
Certain religions are entitled to opt out. Certain people, certain religions. It doesn't really specify what those religions are. But if you have specific religious beliefs that would keep you from being involved in Obamacare and that type of thing, then I would go ahead and ask to be let out and, you know, make the move. As far as opting out completely, there are people that are right now just refusing to sign up. They're going to pay the penalties.
Here I
You
am.
know, that's yeah, pay the penalty. And because if enough people just refuse to sign up, then eventually it's going to fall on its own. And Congress needs to do something. I mean, you know, Congress needs to get involved. They're just sitting on their hands right now. We were promised that they were going to repeal Obamacare. We know as long as Obama's in there, repeal is not going to work because he's just going to veto it. But Congress still controls the purse strings. I think right now, I think you're going to see a lot more activity on Obamacare after the Supreme Court decision is made, depending on how it goes. Because if they do decide that that part of the law is unconstitutional, then Congress at that point can basically wipe it out. So.
Is the privately owned Federal Reserve families unconstitutional?
Privately owned what?
Federal Reserve families, I'm not sure what that meant.
Not sure either.
Is that person here?
I'm here. I'm curious, Federal Reserve that controls basically the purse strings, should that not be under the auspices of the Congress and not the Federal Reserve Chairman?
Are you talking about the Federal Reserve?
Yes, I'm just wondering if the Federal Reserve, in its origin and where it sits right now, is it constitutional or not in your mind?
There's a lot of people that say it is unconstitutional because the Federal Reserve basically is a so-called independent organization and is really not under control of Congress. And yet they are making the decisions for our economy. So I think that I agree with Ted Cruz and other members of Congress that think the first thing we ought to do is audit the Federal Reserve. Find out how they're spending all this money and what the heck they're doing. And so I think the Federal Reserve needs to be seriously looked at.
What can be done to protect our Fourth Amendment rights against the TSA screeners?
The TSA screeners are, you know, getting out of hand too. And there are more and more sophisticated ways that they're looking at people. But until the courts rule it unconstitutional, or until Congress changes the way the screening goes, there's really not much you can do other than refuse to go into one of the scanners and then they pat you down and this sort of thing. You know, right now that is the law of the land and it has not been declared unconstitutional. It hadn't really been challenged, frankly, and I don't understand why. Because we had one person that we were going to challenge it for at one point and then he chickened out on us. So again, that's something that really needs to be resolved in the courts. Because I think that in a lot of ways it violates the Fourth Amendment. In a lot of ways it's good, because they do have ways now to find out if in your luggage, for example, that bottle of scotch is not a bottle of explosives. And they can differentiate that now by just looking at your luggage. So, you know, we've got the privacy issues out there, but unfortunately we also have the security issues.
We impeached Clinton and he stayed. Why pursue impeachment?
Well, again, the reason for impeachment in my mind is to get the information out. And there's two things that will happen if we impeach Obama. Number one, like I said, we get these special prosecutors that start getting all this information that's been hidden. But number two, the man's got 2 years left in his term, if he intends to allow us to have elections in 2016. He's got 2 years left in his term. He's going to do a lot of damage during that period with executive orders and everything. And my articles of impeachment specifically talk about how executive orders violate his oath of office and violate Article 2, Section 3 of the Constitution. If we have him under the gun being tried in the Senate, and that will take about 1.5 to 2 years for all that to be done, then the smart thing for him to do, and he doesn't impress me to be particularly smart, the smart thing would be to stop issuing executive orders, because you're just going to make it worse. And if we keep him busy not, looking for things to do to us and defending himself, put him on the defensive. The man has had us on the defensive for 6 years. I think it's time we put him on the defensive. Go after it. Somehow go after it, because right now he's being emboldened. He thinks he can do anything he wants. Congress is not doing anything to him. Only that ruling in by the federal judge here in Texas has stopped anything so far.
There is a Sharia Law Center in Richardson, Texas. Is this center being challenged in court?
Well, the Sharia Law Center is the one that's setting up this new Islamic tribunal. And you can't really challenge them in court because under freedom of religion, they're entitled to have a center set up. It's a cultural center. So they have their First Amendment rights too. What's not being done is they're not looking at the people there. They didn't look at this conference that was there a couple of months ago, where a lot of Tea Party people went out there and protested because the Garland School District gave them a building to hold a conference on Sharia law. And in fact, it was right after the killings in Paris that they held this. As long as they're paying their taxes, or they're a nonprofit, they're set up and recognized by the state, there's not much the state can do about it, and because of First Amendment issues. But we have to keep an eye on these people. I mean, we had people sitting at that summit in the last 2 days who are known terrorists and terrorist sympathizers, and the President of the United States was pandering to them.
What is the single most important thing, beside casting our ballot, that we can do as citizens to alter the current state of affairs? Educate
people, support groups that educate people, support getting the word out to people, because, I'm always preaching to the choir, and I enjoy that, but I like it even better when I get up in front of people that don't know what's going on, and I talk about what's happening to our veterans, and everybody freaks out. They can't believe it. How can that be going on? They haven't heard in the mainstream media. They're not hearing the truth about the amnesty in the mainstream media. They don't know, and I talk about here in Texas what we see on that border every day and who's coming across that border. They don't know that. They don't know that in Alabama. They don't know that in Mississippi. They don't know that in Illinois. We need to get the word out. We need to get more people out on the stump. We need to talk to our friends. We need to talk to our relatives. And we need to support groups like the United States Justice Foundation that are trying to get the word out, because we're an educational as well as a legal firm. And because, like I said, I'm aghast that when I talk to groups, they don't even know what I'm talking about. When I talk about the 10th Amendment, I get blank stares.
Can't Sheriff Ray in Canton keep the veteran you want to represent safe from being declared incompetent?
No, because that's right now the federal government can do it. So he can't keep the veteran from being declared incompetent. Now, if they come and try to confiscate his weapons, The sheriff then can intervene. And we've actually had this happen in a couple of locations around the country. The sheriff can say, no, not in my county, you can't. You're not going to touch this man's weapons. And I want to talk to this veteran about what he's got and this sort of thing, and start figuring out how to protect him. Right now, we're going to be going forward with his case because we have to exhaust his administrative appeals. And we're going to be doing that as quickly as we can. And then we'll be able to file a lawsuit on behalf of him and hundreds of other veterans we're representing around the country.
What do you mean if he allows us to have an election in 2016? Are you being facetious, or is there a basis for the comment?
I wish I was being facetious. We have a president of the United States who is acting as a dictator. I mean, he considers himself a dictator. He's an elitist. He's narcissistic. Some of the comments made by the State Department official recently about the jihadists and not using the term and this sort of thing. She indicated that peons like you and I, we don't understand the nuances of what she was trying to say. I understood exactly what she was trying to say. But we're considered to be the unwashed masses. And the president doesn't think we're smart enough to handle our own affairs, or we're smart enough to be allowed to own firearms. He's got an agenda. He's not going to complete that agenda in 2 years. If he can find a way, either through martial law or something like that, to stop the election from taking place in 2016, particularly if it looks like somebody he controls, like Hillary Clinton, is not going to win, I'm afraid he'll do it. I mean, I'm looking back at Mein Kampf, a book I read when I was a teenager by Adolf Hitler. And I look at what Adolf Hitler did when he became Chancellor of Germany. He wanted to consolidate himself as a dictator. It took a few years to do it. First thing he did was completely nationalize health care. Figured if I can control access to health care, I control the people. Second thing he did was start to disarm the German people, beginning with the veterans, because they had taken essentially the same oath of office to their country that I took to mine. And you had a lot of World War I veterans out there who were armed and believed in their country. Then he started purging members of the military who were not loyal to him and him alone. We've seen a lot of high-ranking officers being purged. Now a lot of lower-level officers and non-cons are being given their pink slips because of budget cuts or so on and so forth. In the meantime, Obama's got the recruiters out there actively recruiting illegals to join our military. I wonder if they're even going to have to take the same oath I took. But we know who they're going to be loyal to. And then something else that Adolf Hitler did was start using mental illness as a weapon to silence people. That's being done right now to our veterans, to others. And if you go to my blog, you'll find a lot of information on all this.
What can be done about all of the bureaucratic civil service employees who make and enforce regulations, and these people do not come and go as new presidential administrations and new Congresses?
Well, we have to do what Ronald Reagan started when he was elected president. And that was, he went in there and he started getting rid of a lot of these low-level bureaucratic agencies. Obama, of course, created a whole bunch of new ones by illegally appointing czars to handle whole new departments. And that was unconstitutional because none of those were confirmed by the Senate. But what Reagan did, and I was on Reagan's campaign staff, and I worked with him and a lot of his staff members very closely. He told, and the Congress was doing this on its own to a certain extent, but he told his people to look at every federal agency, even if it was just a cubbyhole in a sub-agency, and find out what they were doing and what their budget was. And as a result, they found things like 35 different agencies doing exactly the same thing. Well, he got rid of 34 of them. He closed them down. He significantly reduced the size of the federal government in the 8 years he was president. We need to get Congress to start doing that right now, because Congress is supposed to be in charge of all this. They're supposed to oversee the executive branch. And that means all the agencies. And Congress needs to start doing its job.
Can you explain the law about taking people's guns away if they have their bills automatically paid? Does this include what many people use to have merchants automatically deduct the bill from their accounts?
Pretty much similar to it. Let me give you briefly what is going on with this. Veterans are getting this letter saying, from the VA saying you're going to be declared incompetent to handle your own financial affairs because of your physical or mental disabilities. Now, fiduciary would be appointed to represent you. That fiduciary law has been around a long time. It was designed for elderly veterans who might be suffering from dementia and couldn't pay would forget to pay their bills and would forget to cash their benefits check, this sort of thing. It's rarely used, but it used fine. Well, they started back in 2007 when Congress passed an amendment to the Brady bill, to the National Gun Registration Bill, which said that more people had to be put on there if they were determined, adjudicated to be mentally ill to the point of being a danger to themselves or others. Adjudication means a hearing, or used to. And these veterans are being told for physical or mental disabilities. And then they are being held to be incompetent because they have minor PTSD, because they might have been depressed at one time over the loss of a buddy, because they let their spouses pay the family bills, because they use an automated bill paying system to pay their bills. And I've got the letters from the VA. We have a woman in Virginia who is a widow of a man killed in Vietnam. And they sent her a letter specifically telling her that's the reason they were declaring her incompetent, because she was an automated system. But then that letter goes on to say, once you have been found incompetent, you can no longer own, possess, purchase, or transport firearms or ammunition. If you do, you're guilty of a felony. So we have now about 200,000 veterans on the NICS list for being declared incompetent, because Eric Holder decided that being incompetent, once you were declared incompetent for any reason whatsoever by the federal government, you were automatically mentally ill to the point of being a danger to yourself or others. And that's why they're being put on that list. 99.9% of them don't belong there. So it's a horrendous situation. But they're finding every excuse, and they're extending it now to the civilian population. I recently talked to someone very close to me who was getting on Medicare for the first time and went to see a doctor. And this was right here in Texas. And the doctor apologized because he told her, you have a bunch of questions you have to answer. Federal government requires me to ask these questions. A lot of them were just general health type questions. But there was one in there that says, do you own a firearm? So you think they're not asking the civilian population? You'll be getting those letters from Social Security next thing you know.
I hope I get this last question right. Explain prosecutorial discretion related to the Constitution.
Well, basically that's something that allows a prosecutor to have great discretion over whether or not to actually file charges against somebody. And it's been abused. The Attorney General designee is being investigated right now for violating that prosecutorial discretion by letting some people off the hook that shouldn't have been let off the hook. But it's pretty widespread. It's why, for example, district attorneys cannot be sued unless they deliberately go after somebody that they know is innocent. They can't be sued for prosecution, even if the person's found innocent. So that basically is what it is in a nutshell. It's not specifically mentioned in the Constitution, but that's the way it's been determined to be under the Constitution in general.
I've heard that used as a way for determining what battles they want to fight within the Attorney General's office. Yeah,
well, the Attorney General's office uses it all the time. And they use it to determine which battles to be fought. But the thing is, the Attorney General works for us. So we ought to have some say-so in what they do and don't do. And that's something that we've lost. Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and I'll be in the back.
Mr. Speaker, let's give him a hand. Very informative. If that doesn't get you aroused up about what's happening and what could happen to you, you better take your hand and push your eyes around and wake up. Remember what Rick